Davis. I'm the Assistant Director of Undergraduate Financial Aid.
And,
My name is Scott Palmer, and I'm the prestigious scholarship advisor.
all right, so we are from the Financial Aid Office. We are here to kind of dispel some myths about scholarships and, I guess educate you a little bit on what we do so that hopefully you'll have some information on some of the programs we have, a tiny bit about scholarships, and just the different populations that we serve. I say you won't know all the ins and outs of what we do, but it'll give you just enough information to be dangerous. So, don't try this at home. We are professionals. Okay, these guys are professionals. I play one on TV, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So this is my favorite myth. Ron, I'm not eligible for financial aid. So there's a question I want to ask you. What percentage do you think of students at UC Davis get some type of financial aid? A, 13%. B, 53%. C, 73%. Or D, 100. How many people say A? No A's, okay. B, 53%. One, lone soldier. C, 73%. Did you guys get this? Did you guys get this before? Who passed out the slide? So the answer is, go ahead, answer. The answer is C. In 2012-13, we had 18,879 undergraduates receive scholarships.
Yeah, so you guys are really good. You're smart.
Yeah, you guys are smart.
Nice job.
So the next question is, well, how do they consider themselves eligible? So we can dispel this whole myth of, am I eligible? Well, we have several requirements. One is they have to fill out the necessary financial aid application. One is going to be the FAFSA application, which is the free application for federal student aid. And that's going to be for our U.S. citizens, our eligible non-citizens, and our permanent res. For the California DREAM Act, we're going to have our AB 540 undocumented students are going to be the ones who are filling out that application. Other requirements are going to be enrollment. They have to be in a degree-seeking program. There is a unit requirement, and they also have to maintain satisfactory academic progress. One of the things that I didn't really mention was priority registration.
Oh, sorry.
Really?
Come back.
The priority deadline, and that's because it is a priority. It doesn't mean if you file after that you're not going to get anything. You may not get what you really want, which is the free money, which tends to be what people say when I'm not eligible. It's my family makes too much money, or for other various reasons they think they're not eligible. But if you do this stuff, you're eligible. What you get may not be what you like. So we have different forms of financial aid. So first we have grants. That's what everybody wants. I want the free stuff that I don't have to pay that back. Next, they want, other free stuff, scholarships, which is my specialty. So you have questions on those, I can maybe answer those. And loans. Okay, this is the bad guy. Everyone says, I don't want loans. This is another thing where people say, I didn't get any financial aid. Well, loans are, but we'll cover that later. And then we also have work study, fee remissions, and fellowships. But the one thing I want to point you to is this big pie right here. 71% of the aid we gave out in 2012, 2013 was in grants. Yeah. We planted them out in the audience. Our next myth.
A student's expected family contribution is based solely on income. For any of those who believe in that, it's false. But we do have a question for you. What would be the expected family contribution of a family who earns $100,000 a year? Well, that's easy. It's $100,000, right? Huh? No? All right, well, that's A. No A's out there? Okay. Anybody going to vote for B? 10,000. Any B's? No B's. C, 20,000. So, All right, we got one. Okay, well, D is all of the above. Anybody for D? All right, only 3. Wow. Okay, so this baffles most people, as you can see, and that's why we have it up here. Because the answer is D, it's possibly all of the above. There are many factors that come into factoring out what the expected family contribution is. And so while typically it's not going to be $100,000 unless they have a lot of assets, it could be if they have a lot of assets. And there's a lot that goes into factoring the expected family contribution. I imagine the first FAFSA had one question to parents: how much can you afford to pay for your child's education? And I think the answer was probably 0, pretty much across the board. So the federal government, in their understated way of doing things, now has over 100 FAFSA questions. Okay, so here are some of the factors that go into it. Parents' adjusted gross income, students' adjusted gross income, age of oldest parents, you get the picture. In fact, the bottom was other factors that will not fit on this slide. So one of the things I'd like to share with you guys is it can be a daunting thing to try to fill out what looks like on paper a 103 question FAFSA, but they do have skip logic now, and it usually will take a student, if they have all the parents' tax information and so forth handy, about 20 to 30 minutes, and they can still check their Instagram and their texts while doing it. So, but you do have to get kind of psyched up to do it because it looks daunting. And so we really want folks to complete a FAFSA. At this point, I get to lay a little groundwork. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about cost of attendance. And so you'll notice cost of attendance, it has tuition and fees, but it also has books and supplies, room and board, personal expenses, transportation, and even health insurance is in there. So financial aid doesn't just cover tuition and fees. While that helps a student pay for college, they usually have other expenses that we are able to help with. And so this is how the cost of attendance is arrived at. And I do want to introduce one of UC Davis's special programs. It's really ours. The state has got wind of it, and they're kind of, we're trying to implement something this fall. It will happen, called the Middle Class Scholarship. But we're ahead of the curve. We have what's called the UC Davis Aggie Grant Plan. And so eligible students may have up to 25% of their base tuition and fees covered by gift aid. Base tuition and fees is $12,192. So if I go back here, you're going to see $13,896. The difference is campus-based fees, which are things students tend to vote to charge themselves, like to build a football stadium or an ark. So that's the difference there. Some key points about the Aggie Grant Plan is you have to file a FAFSA or DREAM Act by March 2nd. You have to be in your first 4 years of attendance, California resident, total income between $80,000 and $120,000, and then it goes into cover parents' assets, EFC, and when to file the GPA verification. So we're going to give you an example, and again, this is just to lay the groundwork. You're not expected to be a pro at this point after watching this, but it gives you some idea of what we do all year long. Okay, so Gunrock is our example student with a great last name. He's a California resident. He's an only child who plans to live on campus. Parents earned earned 105 last year and have roughly $50,000 in savings, and because of that, they're eligible for the Aggie Grant Plan. So here's what the package will look like. We have a cost of attendance, an on-campus cost of attendance. We have an expected family contribution. This is actually a student whose name has been changed just for the purposes of this presentation, $25,637, which leaves financial need, if you take the cost of attendance less the expected family contribution, of $8,048. And we pretty much have what's called a self-help component that would normally allow us to only offer the loans to the student. But because of the Aggie Grant Plan, they're going to be also offered $3,048 in grant. So we are trying to help middle-income students as well. Okay.
Now we move on to myth number 3, the game of loans. Yeah, try not to hurt them. So probably a lot of you have heard a little bit about loans, or maybe you yourself have borrowed loans, or I'm sure every person in this room knows several people who have utilized student loans in order to help afford them to pay for their education. This oftentimes comes about through things that we'll hear from students where they may say, I'm just getting a bunch of loans, or I'm too burdened and in debt from the loans. Particularly the media will also put out a lot of information concerning student loans, but then oftentimes they don't do a particularly strong job of balancing that to show the other types of aid that are being given out. As a result, students then begin to develop this myth, and we as a society do as well, that places like UC Davis are actually giving out more in loan funding than we are in grant funding. The reality is this is a myth. It simply is not true. So our question here for you today is, which of these statements here are true concerning loans? How many for option A, that loans are not financial aid? Anybody? Okay. B, if a student declines their loans, their grants will increase. I know, it's great that everyone here is laughing, but you know, we do have students who actually believe this.
Doesn't hurt to ask.
Option C is that we award more loans than grants. Anybody? No? Okay, we got one back there, we got one over there, a few there. And then option D, oh wait, there it is, D, who believes that it's none of the above? Yeah, this presentation went out early, didn't it? Because everybody knows. So answer is actually D, none of the above. So moving on, we've got a couple of interesting facts about UC Davis in relation to loans here, is that first of all, less than half of our students actually, or our undergraduate students, take out loans in any given year. So when we hear this, yes? It'd be both. I mean, so you have students who, in general, if we went back to the last slide real quick here, actually, I tell you what, we'll get to that in just a moment. And we forgot to mention, but in the beginning, if we could just hold questions till the end, we're going to leave some time there to answer questions. But getting back to this part here, less than half of our students in any given year are actually borrowing or choosing to borrow student loans in order to afford their education. So you can see here, if you've got 10 students, we're just representing it with a picture up here. And in 2012-13, you got to back up one, please.
Yep, sorry.
Going too far. We had about 12,000 undergraduates who borrowed student loans, which is something that we are proud of because we know that's less than half of our undergraduate population is doing this. On the other hand, we know that it's still a lot of students who are making that choice to borrow student loans. And as a result, it's something that we still want to work on to hopefully get that number reduced as time goes on in the future. Now you can move on here. So a few pieces of information concerning grants rather than loans is that approximately 53% of our students, or our undergraduate students, receive enough in scholarship and grant funding to cover their tuition and fees. So when Robert was showing you a few moments ago about the different costs that are associated, right away you can see that there's quite a few students who are getting enough of what we call free money that's covering that most direct cost that's up front for everyone. Now, for some of these students, they also have enough in grants and scholarships that they're also covering additional expenses, whether that be their transportation or some of their housing, or maybe it could potentially be everything. But the good news here is that we have a lot of students who are then receiving enough to go ahead and cover this major component of their costs. This is one of the statistics that I'm particularly excited to be able to share because I think this really gets to the point and shows a lot of what we are doing. That in this past year, roughly 3 times as much was awarded in grants and scholarships than what was in loans. So again, if we go back to this perception that students are only using student loans to pay for their education, or that is even the predominant majority of what they're paying, what we can see here is that by quite a wide margin, it's actually grants and scholarships are paying for the largest portion of the cost. There may be individual students within here who are borrowing more in loans, and that is how they're financing their education predominantly. But on the whole, this is how it is being done. Move on here. So a few other interesting facts that we'd like you to be aware of is that in 2012-13, our graduating undergraduate class, 43% of these students did not borrow loans at any time in their academic career while here at UC Davis. So that's a pretty major accomplishment to know that just a little more than 2 out of every 5 students who are leaving UC Davis once they graduate are able to say, I'm walking away without any loan indebtedness. I don't have additional expenses that I'll be paying back in the years to come. And if they choose to move on to more advanced education, perhaps at that time they may need to borrow loans, but they're not doing it in addition to what they have already taken out. In 2011-12, which is the most recent year for which the federal criteria is available, there was information about what nationally was happening on average for students who are borrowing student loans. And you can see the statistics that are up here that show how much students were borrowing throughout the nation and then how much they were borrowing here at UC Davis. And you can see that here at UC Davis, our borrowers were borrowing about $10,000 less than what is the national average in order to finance their degree. This is roughly a third less than what's taking place throughout the rest of the nation. And it's particularly significant that, to put it in other terms, when students enter repayment, they are typically set up on a 10-year repayment plan that's 120 payments. When you factor interest into that $10,000 difference, this is going to come out to more than $100 a month less that our students will then be repaying than what students will on the national average. To see the statistics another way, from that same year, 71% of the students nationally were borrowing loans at one time or another for their undergraduate degree, compared to only 55% here at UC Davis. So we think that there's still areas that we would, of course, like to improve in, but we also see a lot of areas here that we can say we're proud of, that there is a strong accomplishment that is taking place, and we hope to remain ahead of that curve for many, many years to come.
Okay, so myth 4 I get, and that is the UC Blue and Gold Opportunity Plan means all expenses will be covered by free money.
That's got to be true.
Well, it's a myth, so it can't be true.
Oh.
But it is still a very good program. It was put in place by President Udoff, the prior UC president. Oh, here's your false. And all eligible students may have up to their base tuition and fees covered by gift aid. So base tuition and fees is, again, the magic term, which is $12,192. Gift aid equals all sources of free money, including scholarships and grants, whether they're federal, state, UC, or private. For 2014-15, base tuition and fees is $12,192, as we have on there. And then how to qualify, a student needs to file a FAFSA or a DREAM app application by March 2nd. Be in their first 4 years of UC attendance, a California resident, total income less than $80,000 for their family, and EFC less than, they have to have need, is what EFC less than cost of attendance means, and then they have to fill out a GPA verification by the deadline. We're going to give you a little example of somebody who's blue and gold eligible who's actually had it met, but you're not going to see an award that says blue and gold on it. We get a lot of calls like this, where's my blue and gold? But it is actually met, and I'll point out how. Okay, so Sophia Dutton is a California resident who plans to live on campus. Parents earned $12,000 last year, and they have very little in savings. So the cost of attendance for living on campus is $33,685. She has a Cal Grant there of $12,192. So that means that the Blue and Gold Opportunity Plan is met. So anybody who's got a full Cal Grant, they've already got it. If that wasn't there, we would add up the Pell Grant and the University Grant, and again, I think that's just about going to hit it. So that's what the Blue and Gold Opportunity Plan is, because there's a lot of questions we get about that.
My turn again. So another one of my favorite myths. I get a lot of questions from parents and students on, well, I didn't fill out the FAFSA or the DREAM app, so how else, I guess I can't get scholarships. And that's completely false. We do have some scholarships that consider need, but majority of our scholarships are based completely on merit. In order to be eligible, especially for our new students, their UC application is their scholarship application. We make that relatively easy. Transfer students do have the opportunity to submit a letter of recommendation, and it's not required, but it gives them a chance to either A, be considered for the Regent Scholarship as an incoming transfer, or to get an extra bump up in their scholarship score. So we recommend that they do the recommendation. And for continuing students, we have our process is completely online. They fill out the application, and every year the application is available October 1st. And usually around the first or second week of January is when the deadline comes. They have to have the 3.25, and they also need a letter of recommendation. This is required for continuing students. And you know, we don't say it for incoming students just because most of Davis incoming students have a 3.25 or above. Some have like the 4.5 and 4.25. I don't understand that. But, you know, as long as you have a 3.25, you are considered.
Okay, so moving on to myth number 6 is any student can be independent. How many people in this room understand what that means to be independent for financial aid purposes? Okay, it sounds like maybe a good number of you. Well, for those of you who don't, essentially what independent means for financial aid purposes, it's a determinant of whether or not your parents' information needs to be included on the financial aid application, which is either the FAFSA or the federal DREAM, or the, well, not federal, but the DREAM Act application. So go ahead, and we've got another question here for you, is which criteria would make a student independent for financial aid purposes? Is it option A, parents refuse to contribute to their students' education? Anybody?
How do you guys know this? This is great.
Option B, parents are unwilling to provide information for the FAFSA, the DREAM Act, or for verification. Anyone?
The correct answer gets candy.
Yeah, that's right. So option C, parents do not claim the student on their taxes. Okay, we got hands going up all over the room here. Very good. Option D, students who demonstrates total self-sufficiency. Okay, we got some hands going up here. How about option E? Anyone want to go with none of the above? Hey, it's like all the financial aid people want to go with none of the above. So
candy.
this is actually a really, really common myth that we deal with here. It is option E. The federal government's criteria essentially states that it is the family's responsibility first in order to afford a college education. That's where it should initially come from, and that this is not really going to matter as far as whether or not a family wants to contribute or whether or not a student could, you know, feasibly go and live off on their own apart from their parents. Part of this reasoning comes down to that you may have somebody whose family has more than enough ability to pay for college, but if they find out, hey, all you got to do is maybe go live in an apartment on your own, get a job, and then you'll pay for that. You could have families who could easily just write a check for the full amount, suddenly going, hey, I'm now independent, and now I'm qualifying for all of this aid as though I really and truly needed it. So if we can go through the first 5 clicks there. So what we have here is that when a student completes their FAFSA or their DREAM Act application, there are certain questions that they will get asked. And once they answer those, they will immediately be told you are either dependent or independent. The first 5 here, and what are the most common and basic scenarios, are for a student to either turn 24 by January 1st of the particular academic year that they are applying for financial aid. It is if you are married, if you have dependents that you support, which can, it predominantly means children, but it doesn't have to mean that. If you are active duty in the military or if you're a veteran, and then lastly is if you're working towards a graduate degree. Now, part of what I think is really great is the government has really just expanded this in more recent years to recognize that there are situations of students who really and truly are independent, but they don't necessarily fit those main criteria right there. And I think we see more and more students like this throughout our campus and just throughout our lives. So what you will start to see, or what we've been seeing for several years now, is that if you are an orphan or a ward of the court, or if you have been in foster care or ward of the court since you were 13, you are automatically considered independent. And if you're an emancipated minor or in legal guardianship, you are considered independent. And this predominantly is because somewhere else throughout the government, they have already determined that you either cannot be with your parents or you should not be with your parents. And if they're going to certify it there, then in order to line up through the federal criteria here, they're going to basically classify you as independent. So one other thing here is if you are a homeless youth, which I want to just take a moment to speak to this situation and then a couple of situations when we get to the next slide, because in all honesty, with some of these situations, students are completely unaware that they can be independent if they meet these situations here. And we as a financial aid office can oftentimes be really unaware of them also, because there's not a lot of students who are going to walk up to us and say, hey, by the way, I'm homeless. I'm dealing with this issue in my life. So as a result, I'm guessing that every person in this room knows several students. And you may have worked with them, maybe they work in your office, maybe they're just someone that you advise on a regular basis, and you know a lot about their situation. If you know of a student who is either homeless or the situations that we'll talk about in just a moment on the next slide, we would really appreciate it if you would please direct them to our office. Share with us just a little bit about their situation. I'm not going to guarantee that we'll be able to do anything for them, but it's a strong possibility that we can do something for them, and we will at least take a look at it. So over here on this other side for dependent, in 2013-14, what you see is overwhelmingly the students are classified as dependent rather than independent. So even though students may wish to be classified as independent because they can potentially receive more financial aid for being classified so, the reality is that the majority of our students, by an overwhelming majority, are actually dependent. So we move to the next slide. We in the Financial Aid Office are actually given authority by the federal government that we can do what's called a dependency override. And what that means is that when a student has done their FAFSA or their DREAM Act, if they are classified as dependent, if we know of one of these particular situations that are being listed up here and we have really, really strong documentation, we can change them from dependent to independent. So essentially what this means is that after the government has classified somebody, we are learning more about their situation and we are going back to their situation and saying to the government, we're actually going to override the decision that you have made because we know more about what's going on. But again, and I can't stress this enough, we've got to have really substantial documentation in order to validate why we are overriding the government's decision. So the three reasons that we've listed up here is that if a student has been abandoned by their parents, if they are in an unsafe family environment that might threaten them, particularly if you think about this in if someone is in an abusive environment, whether that's physical, if it's sexual, if there is substantial, well, really any drug use that's taking place within the home, realistically, you don't want to send somebody back home, say over break, to say, hey, I got to talk to mom and dad about getting them to fill out their part of the FAFSA, but I know harm is going to come my way if I do. So if you know of students in this situation, have them come talk to us. The last here is that if a student is unable to locate their parents, which it's kind of similar to the whole abandonment, but it's nuanced, it's a little bit different. But overall, it has to be more than just, I just don't feel like interacting with my parents, or I just, when we went back to the myth there, I'm demonstrating total self-sufficiency. It's a difference between if a student just goes, I just want to live on my own, versus I actually don't know where my parents are, or they have realistically moved on from me in life altogether.
How's everybody doing? Is this helpful? Great. Okay, I'm myth 7. AB 540 undocumented students receive less grant funding than other students. That is a myth. Well, there it goes, false. Undocumented students who qualify under AB 540 criteria can apply for financial aid by submitting the California DREAM Act application. The DREAM Act recipients aren't eligible to receive federal aid at this time, so, but they can get UC, campus, and state aid at the same level, at least the same level, as other students. I say that, I'm going to compare two packages. There's going to be a slight difference between the two. Allie Olson is undocumented, AB 540 eligible, plans to live on campus. Parents earned $12,000 last year and have very little in savings, and is DACA certified, which means that she is able to work. Sophia Dutton is an earlier example who is a California resident, plans to live on campus, and parents earned $12,000 last year and have very little in savings. So they're very similar, except one is undocumented, AB 540 eligible. Their cost of attendance, the same. Now the aid packages are slightly different. If you were to add up the grant for the DREAM student, you'd get $25,710. If you add up all the grant, Cal Grant, federal, and university grant, you get $25,185. Now, one of the things is that President Napolitano and Chancellor Katehi have given students this DREAM grant, which is a good thing because these students can't get federal loans yet. And even if they got loans, they might not even be able to work to pay them off. So this is something that helps students that I think is a good thing that the president has done and the chancellor has done as well. But you can see that they're not getting less. So DREAM students don't get less than FAFSA filers. And that's something we wanted to make sure everybody knew. We really care. We're going to have to say, what's that? Oh, self-help. Self-help, if you want the short answer that may or may not answer your question is, if we were to take all the cost of attendance and all the aid we're able to give, and we factored in all the expected family contributions, so you have what the student is expected to contribute towards their education and the parent is expected to contribute towards their education, you have a funding gap. And since we can't meet that with loan, it does look large there. But just a few short years ago, the whole thing was self-help. So this is really a good thing. And we're moving in the right direction on this. Right. That's Trina Wilson, the the Senior Associate Director of Financial Aid at UC Davis. So, yeah. Okay.
Okay, so moving on to myth number 8, we're going to try to pick up the pace just a little bit here because I know we're running a little short on time. But one of the myths we sometimes hear is that students from outside of California must receive more in grant funding because they pay higher overall costs. And this is definitely false. So we've got a package here of a student who's coming from outside of Washington. And I'll just have Robert pull up all of the information so that you can see this is the overall cost of attendance and the total financial need. This student does receive grant funding through the federal Pell Grant and through our university fee grant and university grant programs. But these are the exact same amounts that this student would have received if the student had been from California. The difference here is that this student, in addition to all other costs, pays additional tuition of $22,878. And this is predominantly because when you are from within state, you, as a taxpayer, you are paying into the system. When you're coming from outside of the state, you aren't, and so you have that higher overall cost. What happens here is rather than meeting that with grants, this student has access to additional loan opportunities, or in this case, this is a federal Parent Plus loan that can be borrowed. So the exact amount here is the $22,878 that correlates identically to the amount of additional tuition that that student would have.
All right, another great myth we have is that international students don't receive any financial assistance, which is false. Yes, 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 it's absolutely false. Go ahead and click through them all. So, oops, not that far. So they're eligible for many of the resources that we have on campus. The scholarships is always a huge one. They are eligible for scholarships. With the exception of anything that has a citizenship requirement. We don't have a whole lot of those, but we do have donors who want students who are from California or who want students who are from the US. We do have those. But the majority of them aren't. So those students are eligible. They just have to fill out the application, either if they're coming in as an incoming student, the UC application, or our online scholarship application, like we said. So outside scholarships, our office actually does we have a lot of resources that we collect from different places. We research to provide resources to students who may otherwise have difficulty obtaining scholarships. And we also have our prestigious scholarships, which Scott is an expert in, which we try to gear to all of our students towards to gain that recognition that they deserve. We also have a new thing called for institutional work study for our international students. More information on far as the application and to obtain that is on our website, and we will show you all that information later, but it is available. We also have alternative loans, not optimal, but it is available. and that's either outside of our institution if they are able to get one from a bank or a bank from their country, they're able to do that, as well as short-term loans. Now you actually have to have something coming to you from a loan or scholarships or something in order to be able to get that. But it is an emergency fund, so if your dog's sick and you want to spend your money on that,
I don't know about that.
you know,
Maybe if your car breaks down.
right?
Say.
Well, it's the dog. It's the dog that ate your homework, right?
No.
You have to get it back. So, but just there's scenarios where they will have that opportunity to get a short-term loan.
Usually short-term loans, I think, they often have to do with making rent a lot of times. Okay, I get myth 10. Students' academic performance does not affect their financial aid. Well, obviously that's not true. Okay, so the taxpayers, through their lawmakers, want students to progress because they don't want students to be in college forever. So we have academic progress standards to be able to keep giving them aid so that they will eventually graduate and go out and change the world. Our standards for academic progress have to be at least as standard as the university. And so there may be slight differences because it doesn't necessarily have to be exact, but it does have to be more rigorous. So they have to have a 2.0 GPA cumulative, pass a minimum of 67% of the units that they complete, meet PACE to graduate, which is 10 units per term. They have a maximum time frame to graduate, which is 18 terms of full-time enrollment, which if you divide that by 3, because we're quarter school, like fall, winter, spring, you get 6 years of financial aid. So students can get up to 6 years. It's not a 4-year deal necessarily. Now, what happens if a student doesn't meet academic progress? By federal regulations, we have to not give them aid. However, we can consider appeals for students who have fallen into what is sometimes called bad academic progress. And, we kind of have to see what the problem was in this appeal. They have to write it out, submit it, provide supporting documentation, see that the problem's been addressed, and then we may be able to consider reinstating the aid. And there may be some monitoring that needs to be done as well. There's also a maximum time frame, so if they ended up being longer than 18 terms, sometimes that happens for students who change their majors like late, then they may appeal that too, and we may be able to consider it. They're appeals, so they're not automatic. SAP may or may not affect scholarships that are received, as some scholarships have more rigorous requirements in the academic progress.
Okay, this is our last myth right here, and this is the financial aid office down for you. Anybody here believe this myth? Anybody? I think we all know how frustrating it is to be able to reach out to someone and maybe you don't get a response back, or you really pressing need and you need to get back right away. Sometimes it can feel like I'm just not able to get a hold of them. So we can go on to the next slide and you can just click them all the way through. We've got a couple of facts here about some statistics of the volume that we are receiving and answering specifically. So in this past year, we answered 35,869 calls to our main undergraduate email. There was about 7,000 emails, and then through the scholarship, through the student portal, there was about another 7,400 emails. So all told, that comes out to a little more than 50,000 responses that we provided, and this is only through the undergraduate main phone lines and through the emails. This does not include things like scholarships for people who are contacting each individual office. This does not include the students that we're meeting with or those who are coming to our main desk or we give a presentation. How many students are then asking questions at that or even before or afterwards. So what we will tell you now here is that when in doubt, come check us out. We are both located in Dutton Hall with the undergraduate financial aid is on the first floor, scholarships on the second floor. This is our contact information. We'll leave this up here for anyone who wishes to take this down. I believe we got a few minutes left here for any questions that you may have. So I'm going to just come around with the mic, and then if you just speak loudly in the mic, that's the beginning of the order.
I was just curious at how the work study program for AB 540 students would work. Are there any special considerations? I know for international students, we have institutional work only.
Sure. So questions about work study for AB 540 students. Bob, I'm going to let you take that one.
Yeah, and I have Amy here also as an expert, but what we would do is if a student, we'd have to calculate their need, and if they're eligible, we would use institutional work study to offer them work study so they could work. Does that answer your question? Yeah, they have to be DACA certified, that is true, yeah. Is there anything else? I mean, am I answering your question? Okay.
For scholarships, if a student has a 3.25, do they automatically get approved for scholarship, or is there anything else going on, like not merit-based?
There's no automatic scenario. Basically, it's just like any other application. You apply for a job, you apply to get in the university, based on the different criteria that each scholarship is looking for, because we have a whole bunch of them based on county you're from, high school you went to, major you're in, college you're in. All those different factors go into whether or not a student gets a scholarship. We do have some unrestricted money that can go to students, but you know, overall, it's really just who's qualified.
So there's some criteria that your office can switch a person from independent to dependent, and there was like health and safety issues. And I know that you said that there's a lot of documentation needed. Can you give me some examples of documentations that your office would look at when you do that switch?
Yeah, I'll give you a brief answer to this, and there could be more that would substantiate, but this usually we're looking for like police records, letters from clergy, letters from counselors, things like that are strong support. But we do consider other things, so I wouldn't want to discourage you from having folks come see us if they felt that they couldn't approach their parents for unhealthy reasons.
So I'm an academic advisor in a department, and I work with students who change majors late in the game. And you guys have mentioned the max time frame appeal. I know it's a case-by-case basis, but how often do those get approved? You know, if a student is changing into the major beginning of their senior year, and I mean, is there any kind of hope I can give them if they'll be able to?
All right, I have my experts here in the front, and I have a SAP expert over here. She says it's case by case. There's really no percentage.
Okay.
Again, if they submit the appeal, we're not here to be a barrier to students. We're actually trying to open doors for them.
Yeah.
So we do work with students who may have extended terms. There may be something within the regulations we can look at if they do change their major late, like maybe not looking at some units not related to their new majors, things like that. So,
I just want to say, I think it's something we're trying to point out is just something to consider when you are advising students, that there is a limit. So we do understand there are cases where you would change your major. I mean, yeah, everyone's kind of trying to figure things out, but it's just something really, again, to keep in mind. So, yeah, thank you.
that's Bronwyn Garrison, our compliance person.
Someone have a question for you?
Yeah. No more?
Not anymore. I guess. All right. We'll move it up here then. Move the person in front of you.
How does part-time status affect financial aid? I know a lot of students talk about it and they think they're not going to get any financial aid, so if you can explain that.
Well, yeah, part-time, they will still get financial aid. They have to be enrolled in at least 6 units to get financial aid. That's kind of hard and fast. There are some forms of aid, like the Pell Grant and Cal Grant, that are unit-based, meaning they have to be in, 6, and then, well, the Pell is actually kind of 4, but 6, and then the 3/4, and then 100%, they will get graduated disbursements. So that does matter, at least 6, but when it comes to like academic progress, those will count as half terms. So they can still get aid. I wouldn't discourage them from going part-time, but they have to be in at least 6 units, or we can't do a thing about it. But we would adjust the tuition and fees down. Everything else pretty much stays the same. Ron has something of scholarships.
And they also, for scholarships, they also are still eligible and able to get scholarships in that. And a lot of times we do have that because of people who are planning to graduate. You only have a couple classes left. We don't want to penalize them for graduating in the scholarship situation, so we will still give scholarships for that.
Hope that answers your question.
You had that slide about like basically the average amount of debt that graduating UC Davis students have, and then you also had like the national average. Are you taking into account tuition tuition at public universities and private universities when you're looking at those numbers?
Joyce, that's the full. Joyce is one of our data folks, and that's the full national average, public and private, is what she's saying. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank
Okay,
you.
great. Wow, I went. Should probably go right back to the end.
Director for Graduate and Professional School Financial Aid. I know that this was primarily driven for undergraduate, but I think it's really important to know that the Graduate and Professional School Financial Aid staff, there's 3 of us in there. We also service between 5,500 and 6,500 graduate and professional students. So when you see the numbers up there of 35,000 phone calls, we didn't factor in all of the ones that we do for grad and professional school as well. So I just wanted to throw that in there. We are also readily available for any questions that you have.
I'm Monica from the Early Academic Outreach Program, and I have 2 questions. The first question is, in regards to the 53% that receive enough scholarships, is that mostly in the institutional scholarships, or are they private scholarships, or do we know?
So it's actually a combination of all of those things. I mean, you have the grants, you have the scholarships. Some students do bring in outside scholarships, but there's a portion of scholarships that are housed within my office, but the campus has resources all over. Different departments have scholarships, awards, prizes that they give out. So there's a lot of resources on campus. You just have to seek them out, and hopefully that's what our office, if you come and see us, that's what we can kind of direct you and guide you towards.
Okay, thank you. And then the other question is in regards to the loans. I'm wondering if the increase in loans is the students are taking out is to be able to experience a little bit more, for example, traveling abroad, other items aside from just the academics?
I would say that, yeah, that's true. They do take out some loans, especially for abroad programs that might be more expensive, but for other things as well. I'm sure some of us in college could have taken out less loan if we partied less. But one of the things in talking about abroad is they get to take the aid that they would get if they stayed here abroad, and then in some cases, like if they go through education abroad through the UC study abroad, through Goleta, they actually may get a little bit of bump in their aid in order to facilitate going to that more expensive place. Of course, the flip side is if it's less expensive for the term for them to go somewhere else, we have to bring down the rate because we'd never give more aid than the cost of attendance. I hope that helps. One more question. We have one more question. Sorry. You can see us afterwards, though. We got the Hawaiian shirt. You can find us anywhere.
Ron, you said for transfer students, they could bring in a letter of rec to increase their chances for scholarship. When do they need to do that?
As soon as possible.
So like transfer students starting in fall?
Our application, as soon as it opens, it's available for people to start applying, even transfer students, especially now that the UC application is now available.
Okay.
So they can start doing that now.
Okay.
Once October 1st hits, they're able to submit the letter of recommendation. It is through our process, and then a point that I want to say is like the letter of recommendation can come from their previous institution, whether it's junior college or another university. It can come from here, it can come from a work situation, it can come from an advisor, anybody short of like their parents and their best good friend.
So they just go to your link on our
Yes.
website and then they'll
Yes,
know
and-
how to do that?
And if they don't, they can contact us, and
Okay.
we will happily walk them through the process.
Thank you.
Well, that's it. Thank you all for coming. We hope you debunked some myths.